The morning Mia Chen set up her lemonade stand on the corner of Maple Street and 3rd Avenue, she had no idea she was about to topple an intergalactic empire. The 12-year-old had spent the previous evening carefully calculating her costs. Lemons from the grocery store, sugar from the pantry, paper cups from the restaurant supply store her uncle managed. Her goal was simple: earn enough money to buy her little brother Tommy a new wheelchair. The old one was falling apart, and their parents were working 3 jobs between them just to keep the lights on. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mia squeezed the last lemon into her pitcher, watching the golden liquid swirl with the perfect amount of sugar and ice water. She had perfected this recipe over the past month, testing different ratios until even her toughest critic, her 70-year-old neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez, had declared it the best lemonade she'd ever tasted. The morning sun cast long shadows across the quiet suburban street as Mia arranged her handmade sign, "Mia's Lemonade, 50 cents, all proceeds for Tommy's new wheels." The first customer arrived at 8:30 sharp. Mr. Williams from down the street jogged over during his morning run, his sneakers slapping against the pavement. He dropped $1 into Mia's mason jar and took a cup, downing half of it in one gulp. "This is incredible, Mia," he said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Keep the change and tell Tommy I said hi." Mia's smile stretched from ear to ear as she watched him jog away. $1 down, $299 to go. By noon, word had spread through the neighborhood. Kids from school stopped by on their way home for lunch. Parents picking up their children from summer camp made detours to Mia's corner. Even the mail carrier, a gruff man named Bob who rarely spoke to anyone, bought 2 cups and left a $5 tip. Mia's mason jar was getting heavier by the hour, and her heart felt lighter with each clink of coins and rustle of bills. But Mia wasn't the only one taking notice of the small operation on Maple Street. High above the Earth's atmosphere, in the command center of the massive starship Dominion's Edge, Fleet Commander Zara Voss studied the daily commerce reports from the human settlements below. The Galactic Revenue Authority had established taxation protocols for all inhabited planets 3 years ago, and Earth had been surprisingly compliant. Most businesses registered without complaint, paying their 15% tribute to the empire that had graciously allowed humanity to continue existing. Commander Voss was a career bureaucrat who had risen through the ranks of the Galactic Revenue Authority through sheer determination and an almost obsessive attention to detail. Her pale blue skin bore the intricate tattoos that marked her as a member of the Celian administrative caste, and her silver eyes missed nothing. She had personally overseen the taxation of 17 different worlds, and her success rate was legendary throughout the empire. Every business, every transaction, every credit of income was tracked, recorded, and taxed according to imperial law. The anomaly appeared on her screen as a small red dot. Sector 7, Subsection 15, Grid Reference 42A, an unregistered commercial enterprise operating without proper permits or tax compliance. Commander Voss frowned as she pulled up the detailed scans. A single human juvenile conducting monetary transactions in exchange for a citrus-based beverage. No business license on file, no tax identification number, no compliance with health department regulations, no imperial registration whatsoever. "Enforcement Officer Crix," she called to her subordinate, a towering Zolonian with deep purple skin and the build of a professional athlete. "Prepare a compliance team. We have a tax evasion situation that requires immediate attention." Officer Crix looked up from his datapad, his 4 eyes blinking in confusion. "Commander, the scans show it's just a human child selling drinks on a street corner. The total revenue appears to be less than 50 imperial credits. Surely this doesn't warrant a full enforcement action." Commander Voss's silver eyes narrowed. "Officer Crix, are you suggesting that the law applies differently based on the age of the perpetrator or the amount of revenue involved? Because if that's the case, perhaps you need a refresher course in imperial taxation policy." Officer Crix's purple skin darkened with embarrassment. "No, Commander. Of course not. I'll prepare the compliance team immediately." "Good. And Crix? Make sure the full enforcement protocols are followed. This human will serve as an example to any other would-be tax evaders. The Empire's authority must be absolute, or it is nothing." Back on Maple Street, Mia was having the best day of her life. Her lemonade stand had become a neighborhood sensation. Mrs. Rodriguez had brought her entire book club over for a lemonade break, and they'd each bought 2 cups while praising Mia's entrepreneurial spirit. The teenage boys from the corner house had pooled their allowances to buy a pitcher to share. Even the local police officer, Sergeant Martinez, had stopped by to check on the operation and ended up buying 3 cups to share with his partners back at the station. "You're doing something special here, Mia," Sergeant Martinez had said, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Your brother's lucky to have a sister like you." Mia counted her money for the 10th time that day, $87.35. She was almost a third of the way to her goal, and it was only the first day. At this rate, she'd have enough for Tommy's wheelchair within the week. She could already picture his face when she surprised him with it. Tommy had been stuck in that old chair for 2 years now, ever since their insurance company had denied the claim for a replacement. The wheels squeaked, the armrests were held on with duct tape, and the footrests had broken off completely. The afternoon sun was beginning to slant across the street when Mia noticed something odd. A shadow fell across her lemonade stand, but there was no cloud in the sky. She looked up and saw what appeared to be a small aircraft hovering about 50 feet above the intersection. It was sleek and metallic, with no visible wings or propellers. As she watched, it descended slowly and silently until it touched down in the middle of the street. Cars began to honk and swerve around the unexpected obstacle. Mr. Peterson from the hardware store came out of his shop to see what was causing the commotion. Mrs. Chen, Mia's mother, emerged from their house across the street, her face etched with concern. Other neighbors began gathering on their front porches and sidewalks, pointing at the strange vehicle and murmuring to each other. A door slid open on the side of the craft with a soft hiss. Commander Voss stepped out, her pale blue skin almost glowing in the afternoon sunlight. She was followed by Officer Crix and 2 other enforcement officers, all carrying tablet devices and wearing the distinctive silver badges of the Galactic Revenue Authority. Their appearance was both alien and unmistakably official. Commander Voss walked directly to Mia's lemonade stand, her silver eyes fixed on the hand-painted sign. She pulled out a scanning device and ran it over the pitcher, the cups, and the mason jar full of money. The device beeped several times, and she frowned at the readout. "Are you the proprietor of this commercial establishment?" she asked Mia in a voice that carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Mia looked up at the tall alien woman, her heart beginning to race. I'm selling lemonade. For my brother, he needs a new wheelchair." "I see. And do you have the proper permits and licenses for this commercial operation?" "Permits?" Mia's voice was small. "I don't know what you mean." Commander Voss sighed and gestured to Officer Crix, who began recording everything on his tablet. According to Imperial Code 7A15, all commercial enterprises operating within the jurisdiction of the Galactic Revenue Authority must be properly registered and licensed. Additionally, all revenue is subject to the standard 15% tribute to the Empire. By now, a crowd had gathered. Mrs. Miquez Rodriguez stood with her book club, their faces showing a mixture of confusion and growing anger. Sergeant Martinez had returned and was speaking quietly into his radio. Mr. Williams had jogged back from his route and was recording everything on his phone. Mia's mother had crossed the street and was standing protectively behind her daughter. "She's just a child," Mrs. Chen said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "This is a lemonade stand, not a business." Commander Voss turned her attention to Mia's mother. "Ma'am, the law makes no distinction based on age or the type of commerce being conducted. Your daughter has been operating an unlicensed business and evading taxes. The penalties for such violations are quite severe." "This is ridiculous," Mr. Williams called out from the crowd. "She's trying to help her brother." "Yeah, leave the kid alone," shouted one of the teenagers. Commander Voss raised her hand for silence. "I understand your emotional attachment to this situation, but the law is clear. This establishment has generated approximately 87 Imperial credits in revenue without paying the required tribute. The total amount owed to the Empire, including penalties and interest, is 43 credits and 57 cents. Mia looked at her mason jar full of money, then at the alien woman standing before her. But that's almost half of what I've earned. I need this money for my brother's wheelchair." "That is not the concern of the Galactic Revenue Authority," Commander Voss replied. "You have violated Imperial law, and you must face the consequences." Officer Crix, begin the seizure process. Officer Crix stepped forward with a large evidence bag. "All proceeds from the unlicensed commercial operation must be confiscated pending resolution of the tax violation," he announced. The crowd erupted in angry shouts. "This is our planet," yelled Mrs. Rodriguez. "You can't just take a little girl's money." "She's helping her disabled brother," added Mr. Peterson. But Commander Voss remained unmoved. "The Empire has been generous in allowing humanity to continue inhabiting this world. The tribute system is not negotiable. All commercial activity must be properly registered and taxed." Mia watched in horror as Officer Crix reached for her mason jar. Everything she had worked for, all the money she had earned for Tommy's wheelchair, was about to disappear into the hands of alien bureaucrats who cared nothing for her brother's needs. The injustice of it burned in her chest like a physical pain. "No," she said quietly. Commander Voss raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me? I said no." Mia's voice was stronger now. "You can't take my money. I earned it fair and square. I didn't hurt anyone." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I didn't steal anything. I made something good and people paid me for it because they wanted to." "That's not wrong," the crowd behind her murmured in agreement. Sergeant Martinez stepped forward. "The child has a point. This is getting out of hand." Commander Voss's silver eyes flashed with irritation. "Officer Martinez, I presume? You would do well to remember that your local law enforcement operates under the authority of the Galactic Revenue Authority. Interfering with our operations would be most unwise. And threatening a 12-year-old girl over a lemonade stand is wise?" Sergeant Martinez shot back. The tension in the air was palpable. More neighbors had gathered, and the crowd was growing restless. Commander Voss could see the situation was escalating beyond a simple tax enforcement action. She had dealt with resistance before, but never in such a public setting with so many witnesses and recording devices. "The law is the law," she said firmly. "This establishment will be shut down, and all proceeds will be confiscated. The proprietor will be issued a citation for tax evasion and operating without proper permits." End of discussion. Officer Crix reached for the mason jar again, but Mia stepped in front of her lemonade stand. "You're not taking my money. My brother needs that wheelchair. He's only 8 years old, and he can't walk. He sits in that broken chair every day, and it hurts him. I'm not going to let you take away his chance to have something better." Her voice carried across the street, reaching every person in the growing crowd. There was something in her tone, a determination that seemed far too mature for her 12 years, that made everyone stop and listen. Commander Voss found herself looking into the eyes of a human child who was refusing to back down from an agent of an intergalactic empire. The absurdity of the situation was not lost on her, but she had built her career on absolute compliance with the law. She could not allow this defiance to stand, regardless of the circumstances. "You have exactly 10 seconds to step aside," she said, her voice carrying the cold authority of someone who had never been successfully challenged. "If you do not comply, you will be arrested for obstruction of justice and interfering with Imperial operations." The crowd fell silent. Even the traffic seemed to stop as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Mia stood there, a small figure in a faded t-shirt and jeans, protecting her pitcher of lemonade and jar of coins from an alien enforcement officer who outweighed her by 100 pounds. 1. Commander Voss began counting. Mia didn't move. 2. The crowd pressed closer, their faces showing a mixture of fear and admiration for the brave little girl. 3. Mrs. Chen stepped forward to stand beside her daughter. "If you're arresting her, you're arresting me too." 4. Sergeant Martinez moved to stand on Mia's other side. "And me." 5. Mrs. Rodriguez joined them, followed by her entire book club. 6. Mr. Williams and the teenagers from the corner house stepped forward. 7. Mr. Peterson and a dozen other neighbors moved to form a protective circle around Mia and her lemonade stand. 8. More people joined the circle, including strangers who had stopped to see what was happening. 9. The entire crowd was now standing with Mia, creating a human barrier between the little girl and the alien enforcement officers. Commander Voss looked around at the dozens of faces staring back at her with defiance and determination. She had never encountered anything like this in her years of tax enforcement. Usually people grumbled and complained, but they ultimately paid what they owed. This was different. This was a community coming together to protect one of their own. 10, she said, but her voice lacked its earlier certainty. Officer Crix looked to his commander for instructions. "What are your orders, Commander?" Commander Voss studied the crowd surrounding the lemonade stand. She had the legal authority to arrest every single person standing there, but doing so would require calling in additional enforcement teams and potentially sparking a larger incident. The situation was already being recorded by multiple devices, and she could see news crews arriving on the scene. "Stand down," she said quietly to her officers. "We'll handle this through proper channels." But Mia wasn't finished. She stepped forward, somehow finding the courage to address the alien commander directly. "Why are you doing this? Why do you care about my lemonade stand?" "I'm just trying to help my brother." Commander Voss looked down at the human child, seeing something in her eyes that she hadn't expected. Not fear or anger, but genuine confusion. The girl truly didn't understand why the Empire's laws applied to her small operation. "Because," Commander Voss said, her voice softer than before, "the law must be applied equally to all citizens. If we make exceptions for one person, others will demand the same treatment. The system would collapse." "But I'm not hurting anyone," Mia replied. "I'm helping people. Mrs. Rodriguez says my lemonade brightens her day. Mr. Williams says it's the best part of his morning run. I'm making people happy and earning money to help my brother. How is that wrong?" The question hung in the air between them. Commander Voss found herself thinking about her own childhood on Celia Prime, where she had sold hand-woven bracelets to earn money for her family. No one had required permits or licenses for a child's small business. The bureaucracy had come later, as the Empire expanded and standardized its operations across multiple worlds. "The law is not about right or wrong," she said finally. "It's about order and compliance." "But what good is order if it stops people from helping each other?" Mia asked. The question struck Commander Voss like a physical blow. She had devoted her entire career to enforcing the Empire's laws, never questioning their purpose or effect. The idea that her work might be preventing acts of kindness and compassion was not something she had ever considered. Before she could respond, a new voice joined the conversation. "Commander Voss?" Everyone turned to see a small figure making his way through the crowd. Tommy Chen sat in his broken wheelchair, his 8-year-old face showing the strain of navigating the uneven sidewalk. His mother had clearly brought him outside to see what was happening, and he had managed to wheel himself to the front of the crowd. "Tommy," Mia said, her voice breaking slightly, "you shouldn't be out here. The street is too rough for your chair." Tommy looked up at the tall alien woman towering over his sister. "Are you the one who wants to take Mia's money?" Commander Voss found herself looking down at a child who was even smaller than his sister. His legs were twisted and thin, and his wheelchair was clearly falling apart. She could see the duct tape holding the armrests together and the missing footrests that Mia had mentioned. "I am enforcing the law," she said, but her voice lacked its earlier authority. "My sister is working really hard to get me a new wheelchair," Tommy said. "Mine is broken, and it hurts sometimes. But Mia makes the best lemonade, and people like buying it from her. She's not doing anything bad." The crowd around them had grown to over 100 people, and the scene was being broadcast live on social media. Commander Voss realized that this simple tax enforcement action had become something much larger and more significant than she had anticipated. "The law requires," she began. "The law requires that you have a heart," interrupted an elderly voice from the crowd. An old man in a military uniform was pushing through the crowd, his chest covered with medals and his face weathered by years of service. "I'm Colonel James Mitchell, United States Army, retired. I've seen a lot of injustice in my time, but this takes the cake." He stopped in front of Commander Voss, his steady gaze meeting her silver eyes. "Young lady, I don't care what planet you're from or what empire you represent. What you're doing here is wrong, and you know it." "Colonel Mitchell," Commander Voss said, recognizing the military bearing and authority in the older man's voice. I appreciate your service, but this is a matter of imperial law. Imperial law? Colonel Mitchell laughed bitterly. I have fought against bullies and tyrants my whole life, and they all have the same excuse. I'm just following orders. The law is the law. I'm just doing my job. But at the end of the day, we all have to look at ourselves in the mirror and ask if we're doing the right thing. He gestured toward Mia and Tommy. Look at these kids. Really look at them. A 12-year-old girl is trying to help her disabled brother, and you want to punish her for it. Where I come from, we call that evil. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Commander Voss had been called many things in her career. Strict, inflexible, thorough, but never evil. She looked around at the crowd of humans staring at her with expressions ranging from anger to disappointment to pity. I am not evil, she said quietly. I am simply doing my job. Then maybe it's time to find a new job, Colonel Mitchell replied. The standoff continued for several more minutes with neither side willing to back down. Commander Voss knew that she had the legal authority to arrest everyone present, but the situation had escalated far beyond a simple tax enforcement action. The entire encounter was being recorded and broadcast, turning what should have been a routine compliance check into a public relations nightmare for the Empire. Finally, she made a decision that would change everything. Officer Crix, return to the ship. We're leaving. Commander? Officer Crix looked confused. What about the tax violation? We'll handle it through proper channels, she replied. This situation requires further consideration. As the enforcement officers began walking back toward their ship, the crowd erupted in cheers. People hugged each other and patted Mia on the back. Someone started chanting, Mia, 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 and the whole crowd picked it up. But Commander Voss turned back one last time. This is not over, she said to Mia. The law will be enforced. Mia looked back at her with those same steady eyes. I know, but I'm not going anywhere. This is my neighborhood, and these are my people. If you want to stop me from helping my brother, you'll have to go through all of them. Commander Voss nodded slowly, understanding for the first time that she was not just dealing with a tax violation, but with something much more powerful and dangerous to the Empire's authority. She was dealing with humans who cared more about each other than they feared the law. As the alien ship lifted off from Maple Street, leaving behind only a small scorch mark on the asphalt, Mia returned to her lemonade stand. The crowd gradually dispersed, but many people stayed to buy more lemonade and leave additional donations for Tommy's wheelchair fund. By the end of the day, her mason jar contained over $200, but both Mia and Commander Voss knew that this was just the beginning. The Empire would not simply ignore a public challenge to its authority, and the humans of Maple Street had just declared that some things were more important than following orders. The next morning, as Mia set up her lemonade stand for the second day, she had no idea that her small act of defiance had already begun to ripple outward, reaching other worlds and inspiring other acts of resistance. Somewhere in the depths of space, Commander Voss was writing a report that would eventually reach the highest levels of the Imperial government, describing a human child who had chosen to fight an empire rather than abandon her brother. The war for the soul of humanity was about to begin, and it would all start with a pitcher of lemonade and a 12-year-old girl who refused to back down. The news of Mia Chen's confrontation with the Galactic Revenue Authority spread faster than anyone could have imagined. Within 24 hours, the video footage had been shared millions of times across social media platforms, news networks, and underground resistance channels throughout the galaxy. The image of a 12-year-old girl standing up to an alien enforcement officer became a symbol that resonated far beyond Earth. In the sprawling metropolis of New Singapore, factory worker David Park watched the video on his lunch break. He had been paying imperial taxes on his small electronics repair business for 3 years, watching his profits disappear into the coffers of an empire that gave nothing back to his community. As he watched Mia refuse to surrender her lemonade money, something awakened in his chest. That afternoon, he quietly stopped making his weekly tax payments. On the agricultural world of Kepler-438b, farmer Elena Rodriguez saw the footage while tending to her hydroponic gardens. She had been forced to give up 15% of her crop yields to imperial collectors, watching her neighbors go hungry while their food was shipped off to feed alien bureaucrats. The sight of an entire human neighborhood protecting one child's dream gave her an idea. The next morning, she began organizing the farming collective to withhold their tribute shipments. But nowhere was the impact more immediate than aboard the flagship of the Imperial Fleet, where Supreme Tax Administrator Nexus Krell received Commander Voss's report with growing fury. Krell was a massive Draxian whose species had built their empire on the principle of absolute submission. His armored exoskeleton gleamed under the harsh lights of his command chamber as he reviewed the footage of the incident on Maple Street. "You allowed a human child to publicly defy Imperial authority," Krell's voice boomed through his translator, each word dripping with barely controlled rage. "Do you understand what you have done, Commander Voss?" Commander Voss stood at attention in front of the massive view screen, her pale blue skin even paler than usual. "Supreme Administrator, the situation was complicated by unexpected civilian interference. I made the tactical decision to withdraw rather than escalate to violence against non-combatants." "Tactical decision?" Krell's laugh was a harsh, grinding sound. "You have handed every rebellious world in our empire a blueprint for resistance. Right now, across 17 star systems, beings are watching this footage and thinking they can stand up to us too." The reports were already flooding in. Mining operations on Proxima Centauri B had experienced coordinated work slowdowns. Trade convoys in the Tau Ceti system were facing organized boycotts. Most troubling of all, several colony worlds had begun questioning their tax obligations openly, demanding to know what services they received in return for their tribute payments. "The human problem must be solved permanently," Krell declared. Quote, "This Chen child has made herself a symbol of defiance. We will make her a symbol of what happens to those who challenge the Empire." Commander Voss felt something twist in her stomach at the Supreme Administrator's tone. "Sir, what exactly are you proposing?" "Total enforcement action. We will return to this human settlement with a full battle fleet. We will seize not just the child's illegal profits, but her entire family's assets. We will demolish their dwelling and relocate the family to a penal colony. The brother she claims to be helping will be placed in an Imperial medical facility where his care will be contingent on the family's cooperation." The plan was brutal in its calculated cruelty, designed not just to punish Mia but to send a message that challenging the Empire would result in the complete destruction of everything a person held dear. Commander Voss had enforced harsh sentences before, but something about targeting a disabled child made her hesitate. "Supreme Administrator, perhaps a less severe approach would achieve the same deterrent effect without creating martyrs," she suggested carefully. Krell's 4 eyes fixed on her with predatory intensity. "Commander Voss, your handling of this situation has been questionable from the beginning. Are you developing sympathies for these human lawbreakers?" The question was a trap, and Commander Voss knew it. Showing any sympathy for resistance movements was considered treasonous within the Imperial hierarchy. "Of course not, Supreme Administrator. I simply believe in choosing the most effective approach for long-term compliance. The most effective approach is absolute destruction of anyone who dares to oppose us. You will return to Earth with Battle Group 7. You will arrest the Chen family and anyone who aided them. You will seize all assets in a 10-block radius around the illegal operation. And you will broadcast the entire enforcement action across the Imperial communication network as a warning to other potential dissidents." Commander Voss saluted crisply, but her mind was racing. Battle Group 7 consisted of 12 heavy cruisers and a Dreadnought-class command ship. It was enough firepower to level a small city, and Krell was planning to use it against a residential neighborhood because a 12-year-old girl had refused to pay taxes on her lemonade stand. Meanwhile, on Maple Street, Mia was completely unaware of the storm brewing in space above her planet. She had spent the morning making her largest batch of lemonade yet, anticipating another busy day. Word of her stand against the aliens had spread throughout the city, and people were driving from across town to buy lemonade and support Tommy's wheelchair fund. Her mother had tried to convince her to shut down the operation temporarily, worried about retaliation from the aliens. But Mia was determined to keep going. Every dollar she earned brought Tommy closer to his new wheelchair, and she wasn't going to let fear stop her from helping her brother. The neighborhood had transformed overnight. Mrs. Rodriguez had organized a rotating schedule of volunteers to help with the increased crowds. Mr. Williams had set up a small stage where local musicians performed to entertain customers waiting in line. The teenagers from the corner house had created a social media campaign that was attracting supporters from around the world. Even the mayor had stopped by to pose for photos and declare Mia an honorary citizen of the week. But it was Colonel Mitchell who brought the most important news. The elderly veteran had spent the night making phone calls to old military contacts, and what he learned had kept him awake until dawn. "Mia," he said quietly, pulling her aside during a brief lull in customers. "I need to talk to you about something serious." Mia looked up at the old soldier, noticing the worry lines around his eyes. "What's wrong, Colonel?" "I have friends in military intelligence. They've been monitoring alien communications since yesterday. There's a large fleet moving toward Earth, and all indications are that they're coming here." Mia's stomach dropped. "Here? To Maple Street?" "It looks that way. My contacts think they're planning some kind of major enforcement action. They want to make an example of you and your family." The words hit Mia like a physical blow. She had known the alien commander's warning about proper channels was ominous, but she hadn't expected such an extreme response. "What do we do?" Colonel Mitchell's weathered face was grim. "Officially, the authorities are recommending that you shut down the lemonade stand and issue a public apology. They think it might prevent an incident. And unofficially?" The old soldier's eyes hardened. "Unofficially, I think bullies only understand one language. And sometimes, good people have to stand up to bullies, even when the odds are against them." Word of the approaching fleet spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. By evening, an emergency town hall meeting had been organized at the local community center. Nearly 500 people packed into the building, with more gathered outside listening through speakers that had been hastily set up. Mayor Patricia Thompson stood at the podium, her usually confident demeanor shaken by the magnitude of the situation. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're facing an unprecedented crisis. Military intelligence has confirmed that a large alien fleet is approaching Earth, apparently in response to yesterday's incident on Maple Street." A murmur of fear and anger rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted, "This is insane! They're bringing a fleet because of a lemonade stand?" "The federal government has been in contact with the alien authorities," the mayor continued. "They've proposed a solution that they believe will prevent any violence." She paused, clearly uncomfortable with what she was about to say. "They want the Chen family to surrender voluntarily. Mia would pay a substantial fine. The family would relocate to another planet under imperial supervision, and the matter would be considered closed." The crowd erupted in angry shouts. "That's not a solution, that's kidnapping. They can't just take an American family. What happened to protecting our citizens?" Mia stood up from her seat in the front row, and the crowd gradually quieted. "Mayor Thompson, what happens to my brother if we refuse?" The mayor's face was pale. "The aliens have made it clear that refusal would result in what they call total enforcement action. They haven't specified what that means, but given the size of the fleet they're sending, we have to assume it would be severe." Tommy, sitting beside his sister in his broken wheelchair, raised his hand. "Mayor Thompson, if we do what they want, do I still get my new wheelchair?" The innocent question from the 8-year-old boy broke the heart of everyone in the room. The mayor knelt down to Tommy's level. "I don't know, sweetheart. I honestly don't know." Dr. Sarah Hassan, the local pediatrician who had been treating Tommy since his accident, stood up from the audience. "Mayor Thompson, with all due respect, what we're discussing here is not justice. It's extortion. These aliens are threatening a disabled child because his sister tried to help him. If we surrender to this, what's next? Do we give up any citizen who inconveniences them?" Father Michael O'Brien from St. Mary's Catholic Church joined the discussion. "Dr. Hassan is right. This isn't just about one family anymore. This is about whether we're going to be free people or slaves to alien bureaucrats. Some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are impossible." The debate continued for hours, with the community deeply divided. Some argued for accepting the aliens' demands to prevent a larger catastrophe. Others insisted that surrendering the Chen family would only encourage further oppression. As the night wore on, it became clear that no consensus would be reached. Finally, Mia asked to speak. The crowd fell silent as the 12-year-old girl walked to the podium. "I want to thank everyone for trying to protect my family," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. "When I started my lemonade stand, I just wanted to help my brother. I never thought it would cause all this trouble." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces in front of her. "I know everyone wants to keep us safe. And I know some people think we should do what the aliens want to protect the rest of you. But I keep thinking about something my dad told me before he deployed overseas. Mia's father was a sergeant in the army, currently stationed in Afghanistan. He had left for his third deployment just 2 months before Tommy's accident, and the family was struggling financially in his absence. Dad told me that freedom isn't free, that sometimes good people have to make hard choices to protect what's right. He said that if nobody ever stands up to bullies, then the bullies win, and everyone suffers." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "These aliens think they can scare us into giving up because they have big ships and powerful weapons. But they don't understand something important about humans. We don't give up on each other. We don't abandon our family. And we don't let bullies win, even when they're scary." The crowd was completely silent, hanging on every word from the young girl. "I'm not going to surrender to them. I'm not going to let them take my family away from our home. And I'm not going to stop trying to help my brother. If they want to arrest me for selling lemonade, then they'll have to come and get me. But I'm not giving up without a fight." The auditorium erupted in thunderous applause. People jumped to their feet, cheering and clapping for the brave girl who had just declared war on an intergalactic empire. When the noise finally died down, Colonel Mitchell stood up. "Anyone who wants to leave town until this is over, no one will think less of you," he announced. "This is going to be dangerous, and no one should feel obligated to stay and fight someone else's battle." He paused, his voice carrying the authority of a career military officer. "But for those who choose to stay, we need to start preparing. We may not have alien technology, but we have something they don't understand. We have each other, and we have the home field advantage." Over the next 48 hours, Maple Street transformed into something resembling a military compound. Colonel Mitchell organized the defense preparations with the efficiency of someone who had spent his life preparing for battles. Volunteers worked around the clock to set up barricades, communication networks, and supply depots. Dr. Hassan established a medical station in the community center, stocking it with trauma supplies donated by hospitals throughout the city. Father O'Brien coordinated with other religious leaders to provide counseling and support for families choosing to evacuate. Mrs. Rodriguez organized a massive food drive to feed the volunteers working on the defenses. But it was the technical preparations that proved most impressive. The teenagers from the corner house, led by 17-year-old Marcus Johnson, had rigged up a sophisticated surveillance network using drones, security cameras, and smartphone apps. Local electricians had set up a mesh communication system that would be difficult for the aliens to jam. Even the local ham radio operators had joined the effort, establishing contact with supporters around the world. Meanwhile, news of the approaching confrontation had reached the highest levels of government. In Washington, D.C., President Sarah Chen, no relation to Mia despite the shared surname, was meeting with her national security advisors to discuss the crisis. "Madam President," said Secretary of Defense Robert Martinez, "our military analysis suggests that the alien fleet heading toward Earth significantly outguns anything we have available. If they decide to use force, we would be unable to protect the civilian population." Secretary of State Jennifer Walsh leaned forward in her chair. "We've been in constant communication with the alien authorities through established diplomatic channels. They've made it clear that this is being treated as an internal law enforcement matter. They don't consider it an act of war against Earth." "Internal law enforcement?" President Chen's voice was sharp with disbelief. "They're threatening to destroy an American neighborhood because a 12-year-old girl sold lemonade without a permit. How is that law enforcement?" National Security Advisor Admiral James Burke cleared his throat. "Madam President, we have to consider the bigger picture. Earth has been under imperial taxation for 3 years now. If we openly resist their authority, it could trigger a full-scale invasion. And if we hand over an American family to alien authorities for the crime of running a lemonade stand, what does that say about our values as a nation?" The president shot back. The debate in the Situation Room reflected the same divisions playing out in communities across the country. Some argued for pragmatic surrender to prevent a larger conflict. Others insisted that some principles were worth fighting for, regardless of the consequences. As the hours ticked by, more intelligence reports arrived about the alien fleet's approach. The ships were massive beyond anything humanity had encountered before. The lead vessel alone was larger than a city, armed with weapons that could theoretically crack a planet's crust. Against such overwhelming force, Earth's military seemed like children with toy soldiers. But in a small neighborhood in suburban America, a 12-year-old girl was preparing to prove that sometimes size and technology weren't everything. Mia Chen had no idea that her decision to protect her lemonade stand was about to become the spark that would ignite a galactic revolution. She only knew that her brother needed a wheelchair, her neighbors believed in her, and she would rather die fighting than live on her knees. The alien fleet was still 18 hours away when Mia made her final preparations. She mixed a fresh batch of lemonade, arranged her cups and napkins, and placed her hand-painted sign exactly where it had been for the past week. Tomorrow, the most powerful empire in the galaxy would arrive to arrest her for tax evasion. She was ready for them. The morning sky over Maple Street was still dark when the first alien ships appeared like falling stars. Commander Voss stood on the bridge of the lead cruiser, watching through the massive viewports as Battle Group 7 descended through Earth's atmosphere. 12 heavy warships and the dreadnought Absolute Authority formed a perfect attack formation above the quiet suburban neighborhood. The overwhelming display of force was designed to crush any thought of resistance before it could begin. Supreme Tax Administrator Krell's voice crackled through the communication system from his command throne aboard the flagship. "Commander Voss, you will proceed with the enforcement action immediately. I want this entire district secured within the hour." Commander Voss stared down at the small houses and tree-lined streets below. Thermal sensors showed nearly 3,000 humans gathered in the area around the Chen residence, far more than intelligence reports had indicated. The concentration of civilians complicated the operation significantly. "Supreme Administrator, sensors are detecting a large civilian presence in the target zone. Perhaps we should establish a perimeter and negotiate their withdrawal before proceeding." "Negative, Commander. These humans have chosen to harbor criminals and obstruct imperial justice. They will face the consequences of their decision. Begin the assault." On the ground, Mia Chen stood behind her lemonade stand exactly as she had every morning for the past week. The only difference was the crowd of supporters surrounding her. Neighbors, strangers, news crews, and volunteers from across the country had gathered to witness what many believed would be humanity's final stand against alien oppression. Tommy sat beside his sister's stand in his deteriorating wheelchair, his young face showing a mixture of fear and determination. He had insisted on being there despite his mother's protests, declaring that if aliens were coming to arrest his sister, they would have to go through him first. Colonel Mitchell coordinated the defense from a hastily constructed command post in Mrs. Rodriguez's front yard. Military veterans, local police officers, and armed civilians had positioned themselves throughout the neighborhood. They knew their weapons were no match for alien technology, but they had prepared other surprises. "Remember, people," the colonel's voice carried through their makeshift radio network, "we're not trying to win a war here. We're trying to prove a point. Show them that humans don't go quietly." The first alien transport ships touched down on the main street, their landing thrusters scorching the asphalt. Dozens of heavily armored enforcement officers emerged, carrying energy weapons that hummed with barely contained power. They formed precise tactical formations and began advancing toward Mia's position. But something was wrong. As the alien troops moved forward, they encountered obstacles that hadn't been visible from orbit. The teenagers had spent 2 days digging trenches and constructing barriers that channeled the advancing forces into narrow corridors. Mirror panels reflected the morning sun into the aliens' sensitive optical sensors. Smoke grenades created confusion and limited visibility. More importantly, the humans weren't fighting the way the aliens expected. Instead of massing for a direct assault, small groups appeared and disappeared like ghosts. They used hit-and-run tactics that frustrated the aliens' superior firepower. Every time an enforcement team thought they had cornered some humans, their targets would vanish through basement tunnels or hidden passages. Marcus Johnson and his technical team had spent days mapping every storm drain, utility tunnel, and crawl space in the neighborhood. They had created an underground network that allowed defenders to move unseen beneath the alien forces. What had seemed like a simple enforcement action was turning into an urban warfare nightmare. Commander Voss watched the tactical displays with growing frustration. Her forces controlled the air and had overwhelming technological superiority, but they couldn't pin down the human defenders long enough to establish order. Every attempt to advance toward the Chen residence met with coordinated resistance from multiple directions. Squad 7, report status, she radioed to her ground forces. Commander, we're taking indirect fire from unknown positions. No casualties, but we can't locate the source. These humans are using the terrain against us. Squad 12 here. We've secured the eastern approach, but there are civilians everywhere. Every building seems to have non-combatants in it. Rules of engagement prohibit us from using heavy weapons in populated areas. The rules of engagement were proving to be the aliens' greatest weakness. The Galactic Revenue Authority had strict protocols about avoiding civilian casualties during enforcement operations. The humans had cleverly positioned non-combatants throughout their defense network, making it impossible for the aliens to use their superior firepower without risking massive collateral damage. Supreme Administrator Krell's patience was wearing thin. Commander Voss, I'm monitoring your progress, and it's unacceptable. You have sufficient force to level that entire district. Use it. Supreme Administrator, there are thousands of non-combatants in the area. Implementing heavy bombardment would result in massive civilian casualties. Then the civilians should have chosen their allies more carefully. You have 10 minutes to secure the target, or I will order orbital bombardment of the entire grid square. The threat sent a chill through Commander Voss. Orbital bombardment would kill everyone in a 6-block radius, including thousands of innocent families. She had enforced harsh penalties before, but wholesale slaughter of civilians violated every principle she had sworn to uphold as an officer. Meanwhile, at ground zero of the conflict, Mia continued serving lemonade to anyone who wanted it. The surreal sight of a 12-year-old girl calmly conducting business while alien warships hovered overhead became the defining image of the confrontation. News cameras captured every moment as she handed cups to nervous reporters, frightened neighbors, and even a few curious alien soldiers who had approached under flags of truce. One young enforcement officer, barely out of training, had wandered close enough to smell the fresh lemons. His translator device picked up conversations about the disabled boy and his need for a wheelchair. The disconnect between the massive military operation and its actual target was becoming impossible to ignore. Commander, the young officer radioed back to his unit, the human juvenile appears to be providing free refreshments to anyone who approaches, including our personnel. What? She offered me a cup of her beverage, Commander. No charge. She said anyone fighting far from home deserves something cold to drink. Commander Voss felt something twist in her chest. The human child was showing kindness to the very soldiers sent to arrest her. The generosity was so unexpected, so completely opposite to everything the Empire had taught about human nature, that it challenged fundamental assumptions about the species. The breakthrough came when Dr. Hassan approached the alien command post carrying a medical scanner. She had spent years working in war zones before becoming a pediatrician, and she recognized the signs of a commander struggling with impossible orders. "Commander Voss," she called out, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard in crisis situations. "I'm Dr. Sarah Hassan. I'd like to speak with you about this situation." Commander Voss looked down at the human woman, noting the medical insignia on her clothing. "Doctor, you should evacuate the area immediately. This is an active enforcement zone." "I'm aware of that. I'm also aware that you're being ordered to use lethal force against a neighborhood full of children and families. Is that really the kind of officer you want to be?" The question hit Commander Voss like a physical blow. "I am following lawful orders from my superior officer." "Are you?" "Because from where I stand, it looks like you're being ordered to commit mass murder, because a little girl wouldn't pay taxes on her lemonade stand." Dr. Hassan pulled out her medical scanner and activated its display. "Would you like to see Tommy Chen's medical records? The boy your empire is willing to kill to make a point?" Despite herself, Commander Voss found herself looking at the scan results. The 8-year-old's spine had been severely damaged in a vehicle accident. He was in constant pain, and his current wheelchair was contributing to further deterioration. The new chair his sister was trying to buy would significantly improve his quality of life and mobility. "This is what you're really fighting," Dr. Hassan continued. "A disabled child's hope for a better life. A sister's love for her brother. A community's willingness to protect their own. Tell me, Commander, is this really what your empire stands for?" Before Commander Voss could respond, Supreme Administrator Krell's voice boomed through the communication system. "All units, cease ground operations immediately. Orbital bombardment will commence in 60 seconds. Clear the target area." The announcement sent shockwaves through both the alien forces and the human defenders. Even the most experienced soldiers looked up at the massive dreadnought overhead with expressions of horror. Orbital bombardment was the ultimate weapon, reserved for the most extreme circumstances. Using it against a civilian neighborhood crossed every line of civilized warfare. Commander Voss realized she was facing the most important decision of her career. She could follow orders and watch thousands of innocent humans die for the sake of imperial authority, or she could choose a different path. "Negative, Supreme Administrator," she said into her communicator, her voice steady despite the magnitude of her decision. "I cannot authorize orbital bombardment of a civilian area. Commander Voss, you are relieved of command. All units, this is Supreme Administrator Krell, assuming direct control. Orbital bombardment will proceed as scheduled." The dreadnought's main weapons began powering up, their energy signatures visible even to the naked eye. The massive ship's targeting systems locked onto the neighborhood below, preparing to erase Maple Street from existence. But Commander Voss wasn't finished. She activated the general communication channel, broadcasting to every ship in the fleet. "All ships, this is Commander Voss. I am invoking Article 7 of the Military Justice Code. Supreme Administrator Krell is ordering the mass execution of non-combatants in violation of Imperial law. I am assuming fleet command under emergency protocols." The announcement created chaos throughout Battle Group 7. Article 7 was an obscure regulation that allowed military officers to countermand civilian orders that violated the Empire's own rules of warfare. It had never been invoked in the field before, and many officers weren't even sure if it was still valid. "Security, arrest Commander Voss immediately," Krell roared, but his security detail hesitated. The commander's invocation of Article 7 had created legal uncertainty about who held legitimate authority. On the bridge of the heavy cruiser Unrelenting Justice, Captain Thorax faced an impossible choice. He could follow Krell's orders and participate in what was essentially mass murder, or he could support Voss's mutiny and face court-martial. The decision was made for him when his communications officer reported incoming transmissions from other ships in the fleet. "Captain, we're receiving stand-down orders from the cruiser's determined will and absolute compliance. Their commanders are supporting Commander Voss's action." The rebellion was spreading through the fleet as individual commanders chose conscience over orders. Within minutes, 8 of the 12 ships had declared support for Commander Voss. The remaining vessels found themselves isolated and outnumbered. On the ground, the alien soldiers watched in amazement as their own fleet turned against itself. The enforcement operation had collapsed into civil war, and the humans they had come to arrest were now offering medical aid to wounded alien personnel. Mia approached Commander Voss during the confusion, carrying a cup of lemonade and wearing the same determined expression she had shown throughout the crisis. "Commander, would you like to try some? It's on the house." Commander Voss looked down at the human child who had started a rebellion with nothing more than a pitcher of lemonade and the courage to say no to injustice. She accepted the cup and took a sip, finding it perfectly balanced between sweet and tart. "It's very good," she said quietly. "Thank you. I've been practicing the recipe for a long time. Would you like to meet my brother?" Tommy wheeled his broken chair over to where they stood, his young face showing curiosity rather than fear. "Are you the alien commander? The one who tried to take Mia's money?" "I am," Commander Voss admitted. "Why did you change your mind?" The simple question from an 8-year-old boy cut straight to the heart of everything Commander Voss had been struggling with. "Because your sister helped me remember something I had forgotten. Sometimes the law and what's right aren't the same thing." The resolution came not through violence but through an act of unprecedented cooperation. The rebel alien commanders joined with human officials to establish new protocols for imperial taxation. The Galactic Revenue Authority would be restructured to focus on legitimate commerce rather than punitive enforcement. Small-scale operations like lemonade stands would be exempt from taxation entirely. Supreme Administrator Krell was arrested by his own security forces for attempting to order the execution of civilians. Commander Voss was promoted to fill his position, becoming the first officer in Imperial history to rise through the ranks by refusing orders rather than following them. Tommy received his new wheelchair within a week, purchased with donations from across the galaxy. Beings from dozens of worlds had been inspired by his sister's stand and wanted to contribute to his care. The old broken chair was retired to a place of honor in the Smithsonian Museum as a symbol of how small acts of love could change the universe. Mia continued operating her lemonade stand, though she no longer needed the money for Tommy's wheelchair. Instead, she began donating the proceeds to help other families facing medical expenses. Her recipe became famous throughout the galaxy, and she received requests for the secret ingredients from restaurants on distant worlds. The monument erected in Maple Street bore a simple inscription. Here stood a child who refused to surrender her brother's dreams to the demands of bureaucracy. Here began the revolution that taught an empire the difference between law and justice. Years later, when interstellar historians studied the collapse of the old imperial system, they would trace its origins to a single moment of defiance. A 12-year-old girl had faced down the most powerful empire in the galaxy because she believed her brother deserved a better wheelchair. In doing so, she had proved that sometimes the smallest acts of courage could topple the largest structures of oppression. Commander Voss, now Supreme Administrator Voss, kept a framed picture in her office showing Mia and Tommy serving lemonade to a long line of customers from dozens of different worlds. It reminded her daily that true authority came not from the power to destroy, but from the wisdom to protect those who could not protect themselves. The empire still existed, but it was no longer the same empire that had once demanded tribute from children's lemonade stands. It had learned, through the courage of one small human family, that some things were worth more than taxes, regulations, and the blind enforcement of law. It had learned that mercy was not weakness, that compassion was not compromise, and that sometimes the greatest victories came not from conquest, but from choosing to do the right thing. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.